Good morning, and welcome to this briefing on the Silicon Valley poll. The poll has been placed in the field by the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies, the research arm of joint venture Silicon Valley. It was carried out in partnership with Bay Area News Group, and the polling was conducted by Embold Research, a division of Change Research Incorporated. The mission of joint venture Silicon Valley is to bring together our region's leaders across every major sector to provide data and analysis and to tackle the challenges facing the region, such as the ones identified by the respondents to this, our second annual poll. Now here to brief us is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Joint Venture, Russell Hancock.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends, residents of Silicon Valley, respondents to our poll. To all of you, I say welcome. We're delighted that you would join us. We have a lot to talk about. It's all going to be very interesting. We hope you'll find it absorbing, but I want you to know right off the bat that none of this would be possible were it not for generous funding that we have received from Kaiser Permanente. And so to welcome us this morning, I would like you to meet the physician-in-chief at Kaiser's Santa Clara campus. He's also a member of our board of directors. His name is Dr. Rakesh Chowdhury. Dr. Chowdhury, we're grateful to you, we're grateful to Kaiser, and thank you for joining us on screen today.
Thank you, Russ. Really a privilege to be here today. As Russ said, my name is Rakesh Chowdhury. I'm the physician-in-chief at Kaiser Permanente Santa Clara campus. I also have the privilege of serving on the board of directors of Joint Venture Silicon Valley. Kaiser Permanente is very proud to sponsor the work of Joint Venture and its research arm, the Institute for Regional Studies. We think the fieldwork and fact-finding the Institute provides is absolutely crucial to our region. Why do I say that? Well, just like in medicine, data needs to drive decisions and progress. At Kaiser Permanente, we have our division of research, studying data to create best practices in medicine. Here in Silicon Valley, we have the Institute for Regional Studies. Because regions that want to make progress on their issues need to have a solid base of facts at their disposal. The work that the Institute provides allows us to be data-driven in our decision-making. It also empowers our citizens and voters to make personal judgments on the basis of these facts. We also very much appreciate that the Institute operates independently from any one organization or sector, and is therefore trusted for providing information that is neutral, objective, and scientific. Now, one very valuable form of information is to know how people are feeling about our region and about their own prospects here. Doing that in a way that is thorough and rigorous requires the science of opinion polling and survey research, and today you will receive the fruits of that. Opinions matter. So do people's feelings. Often these thoughts and feelings will align with the actual facts. However, opinions can also run contrary to the facts. Whichever the case may be, it's important to note that perception is a form of reality. At Kaiser Permanente, our doctors and staff may rely on data for diagnosis and understanding underlying issues. But when it comes to patient care, it is all about perception and feedback from our patients. We work closely with patients based on where they are, because if you don't have patient buy-in, they aren't going to feel comfortable with their care. In medicine, patient perception is critical to creating positive care outcomes. Just like in medicine, public perceptions can carry our region one direction or another, and sorting it out is vital to our community well-being. That's where the Silicon Valley poll comes in. It is placed in the field every September by Joint Venture and the Institute, and it is carried out in partnership with the Bay Area News Group. The survey instrument is placed in the field by Embold, a division of Change Research, and their lead pollster, who you will meet today, is an affiliated researcher with our institute. The results are now in, and they're very interesting. To tell us all about it, we have Joint Venture CEO and President Russell Hancock, and it's my duty now to give Russ the screen. I want to thank everybody for joining us and say that Kaiser Permanente is delighted to see so many people like you committed to our region's health and welfare. Russ, please lead us through the results.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury. We so much appreciate that. We are going to delve right in. I am looking out my window at cloudy skies. There's overcast. It's not the usual blue skies that we're accustomed to here in Silicon Valley, and that's probably a mirroring of what we discovered in the poll, this year's installment of the poll. There's a mood out there. The mood is gloomy. The mood is darkening, and we're going to talk about that. I'm going to begin by sharing my screen, and we will start walking you through the results. Before I do that, I just wanted to give you a sense of the flow of our program today. I will present the findings. Then we will go into some quick technical notes from Kyla Ronellenfitch, who was our lead pollster, and we'll talk about the methodology. We will then be favored to have a performance from one of our region's thriving arts groups. We celebrate their work. That will be followed by a panel discussion with two of the Mercury's very distinguished journalists. And then there will be poetry pronounced upon us as a benediction at the very end. All of this will take place in the space of 1 hour at 10 o'clock. We promise you that we will be dismissed. I'd also like you to know that as we are presenting the poll, as we're having the panel discussion, we invite you to participate. Now, because this is a Zoom webinar, the way that you can participate is by using the question and answer feature. And you can type your questions there. We will be monitoring them, and as best we're able, we will be feeding them to our panelists. You're also welcome to use the chat feature. Go ahead and say hello to folks. Introduce yourselves. If you have thoughts that you want to share, we welcome that as well. Let's begin. Let me now start telling you about the 2022 installment of the Silicon Valley poll. There are certain questions that we ask every year, because we like to track them over time. And this is a question that we begin with. It's, do you think that the quality of life in the Bay Area is getting worse or getting better? Well, guess what? This year, 73% of respondents said that it's getting worse. Quality of life is eroding in the Bay Area. That's a pretty staggering number. Highest number that we've ever seen. Let's delve into that just a little bit. These findings, by the way, are across the board, across every demographic. And let me make that observation up front. Sometimes we see striking disparities between certain demographics. And so we try to point those out. What was striking this year is that there weren't any jarring disparities between demographic groups as we will identify them. And by the way, for you, the users of the poll, we want to make sure you understand that all of this is available to you at the joint venture website. You can simply click on the poll tab on our website, and you can read a narrative version of the report. You can read all of the cross-line results. If you are even more deeply interested in this data and information, you can click on the full results of the poll that has all of the cross tabs, and you can create your own stratifications. But let me just delve into this a little more deeply. So 73% of us overall think that the quality of life in the Bay Area is getting worse. Who in particular is feeling that way? Well, we noticed that it was this age group, 35 to 49, 50 to 64. We wanted to flag that. Why? Because that's your working population. So the folks that are working in Silicon Valley think that despite their work, the overall region is losing ground. This also obtained with people who have some or have not completed their college education. It was interesting that there was a stronger feeling about the erosion in two particular counties, San Francisco and Contra Costa. And then we thought this was interesting. Republicans are gloomier than their Democratic peers, actually by a pretty big margin, 62% of Republicans, whereas only 23% of Democrats had this sense of quality of life eroding. Now, we also asked folks if they think that that the Bay Area is on the right track or on the wrong track. So let me signal that result for you. It's pretty stunning. Last year, a tiny majority of folks thought that the Bay Area was starting to go off the rails, 52%. This year, that number, 62%. That's a 10-point jump. That's a significant finding. So again, I say the mood is dark. 62 points. Now, we were also interested to look at California and the United States, and actually, folks think the same of our state and of our nation. On the wrong track. However, it's interesting that people feel a little better about California than they do about the Bay Area. Interesting. So 62% of folks are saying Bay Area wrong track. 5 points fewer would say the same of California. The nation gets the worst report card. 74% of Bay Area respondents thinks that our nation is going the wrong direction. Now, we also ask every year in the poll if people think they're going to stay or if people think they're going to leave. And we learned that 56% said they agree with this statement. I am likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. 50% agree. That's a number that held firm from last year. Last year, also 56%. But let's show you who is especially feeling this way. Seniors, folks that are 65 and above, actually feel this less than folks who are 18 to 34. College educated feel a little more secure about staying in the Bay Area. Retired folks, perhaps because they're settled, perhaps because they're homeowners, feel like they're not making any plans to move. This shouldn't surprise us. If you are a homeowner, you're less likely to feel like you're going to move out of the Bay Area. And then we thought it was an interesting split between, again, Republicans, Democrats. 75% of Republicans think they will make plans to move, whereas a minority of Democrats, 47% of Democrats feel that way. Well, then we asked, okay, why are you thinking to move? Well, none of us should be surprised by this. It's because of the high housing costs. That's tops on the list. The other things are the quality of life here. And then people identified the amount of taxes, personal income taxes, that you have to pay as a resident of California. But that's a smaller percentage by far when you compare it to the top concern, which is housing. 67% of respondents say it's the housing. It's the housing, stupid. It's housing. Housing is the thing that is our Achilles heel. Housing is the thing that makes people think that they might want to leave. Now, this is interesting. Even though people think we're on the wrong track, even though people think they may be making plans to move, we still surfaced a very strong sense of belonging. And so I wanted to bring that to your attention. We asked people, how strongly do you feel a sense of belonging to the Bay Area? And it turns out that 67% of respondents feel like they have a real sense of belonging, either very strong sense or a somewhat strong sense. It was also interesting to us that they feel less attached to their particular town or city, and even less attached to their neighborhood. It's a striking finding. So people are concerned, they're deeply concerned about the region, and yet they have an attachment here. Maybe we'll unpack some of that in the panel discussion. Now, we also ask people to rank the problems that they see as most serious facing the Bay Area. And again, this is consistent with previous slides that I showed you, is the cost of housing. It's the cost of housing, the cost of living. And here I just want to make clear that the cost of housing is identified as an extremely serious problem or a very serious problem by fully 92% of respondents. 9 out of 10, more than 9 out of 10 think cost of housing is extremely serious. Cost of living follows closely behind. And then the third problem that was identified by respondents was the precipitous rise in homelessness. That also obtained last year. Some other problems are making their way off the list, and others are starting to make their way up the list. And I just wanted to signal those for you. For example, no surprise, people are now less concerned about the pandemic to the point where really only a fraction of us, 10%, are viewing the pandemic any longer as serious. That's because we do in fact seem to be in the waning days of the pandemic. But I also wanted to point out that people are now identifying climate change and its impacts as a very serious problem. The people who think this is not a serious problem are year by year declining in number, declining in percentage point. The other one that we identified was crime. Bay Area respondents this year ranked crime as a much more serious problem than they have in previous years. Maybe that pegs to the performance of our economy overall, the bifurcation of our economy. There's probably some causality there. It's interesting to look at the economy itself. We asked people, how do you feel about the economy? I wanted to flag two really fascinating results. The first is this one, that half of respondents say, my finances are good or even excellent. So that's striking to note. Yet, of that group, 38% still feel pessimistic about the economy. My finances are fine, but I don't have a good feeling about this economy. Interesting result. Now, it also appears that men and women are experiencing the Silicon Valley economy differently. 40% of men view our economy favorably. It's an economy with opportunity, whereas only 31% of women view the economy favorably. That's a 9% gap. That's a big gap. And so we wanted to signal the gender gap there. It probably tracks with income figures themselves because our poll respondents rank themselves in an income category. And more than 50% of men are in the category of $100,000 in annual earnings or above, whereas only 29% of women are in that same category. So we have an income gap and a gender gap in Silicon Valley. And as a result, we see these kinds of responses when we probe people about it. Now, we also found this interesting result. We asked people, do you consider racism to be a significant problem? I told you that for the most part, we don't stratify by demographic, by race, by age, by ethnicity. This was one question, however, where we did find a disparity. So how serious of a problem do you think racism is in your area? 8 out of 10 people consider it a serious problem, either an extremely serious or a very serious problem, or a problem. 8 out of 10. So let's be very clear about that. However, the degree of extremity, the degree to which people think it is an extreme problem does differ by ethnicity. Our Black or African-American residents feel, 39% feel it is extremely serious, whereas our Hispanic or Latina members feel that 30% feel that it's extremely serious. Compare that to 29% of API. And then finally, 18% of white or Caucasian respondents would label racism as an extremely serious problem. So we flag that gap. Now, I want to talk for a few minutes about housing. Every year in the poll, we choose a handful of topics that we believe are timely or topical, and we go into greater depth with our respondents about those. So the first was housing, and we just wanted to understand how people feel. Now, just to review, we showed you that people consider housing to be an extremely serious problem. 92% of respondents would rank it an extremely serious problem. When we asked why you were thinking to move out of the region, people said, well, it's the high housing costs. So that's that we stipulate that. That's the foundation for these responses. Now, having established that as our baseline, we ask people, do you think you will ever be able to own a home in the Bay Area? And the sad result is that housing is now out of reach for almost everybody. Residents are giving up on their home ownership aspirations. And the specific number is 65%. 65% say, I would like to own, but I don't think I will ever be able to. 15% think maybe someday it will be possible. That's a small percentage of our population. Okay, so stipulate that. Now, here comes the question. This is the key question. All right, so if housing is our most important problem, what then shall we do about the problem? And we posed these questions. Would you favor building significant quantities of new housing so that we can address our housing costs, so that we can alleviate the pressure on pricing? And that outcome was 52%, just so you know. So 50% of respondents said, yes, I'm in favor of building new housing. And let me show you how that breaks down by particular groups. Young people, very much in favor of more housing, 63%. Of the ethnicities, our Black or African-American respondents were the most in favor of more housing. And then, no surprise, renters were very much in favor, 66%, of adding more housing to the Bay Area. Okay, so then comes the key question. All right, if you're in favor of housing, if you think that we need more, what therefore shall we do? Would you be in favor of any of the following? And we'd like to show you this result because this is a very important result for all of us as citizens to understand. So we said, would you be in favor of subsidized housing for low-income residents? And 57% said, yes, I would be in favor of that. However, when we said, okay, but how about if we were to build that subsidized housing within a half mile of your home? Then the result was 43%. In other words, we lose 14 percentage points. Now, let me stop right here and make a very important methodological observation. We did not pose the question in exactly this way. We want you to know that we took the sample and we split it in half. And half of that sample, we asked, would you be in favor of subsidized housing for low-income residents? And we got that result, 57%. We did not ask them about building it within a half mile of your home. Why? Because that puts them on the spot and it sets the question up as a gotcha question. And we did not want to do that. We wanted to get a more genuine, more authentic result. So we asked the other half of the sample, would you be in favor of building subsidized housing within a half mile of your home? And that was the outcome that we got, 43%. So that's the disparity. People generally seem to be in favor of more housing, but they do not want to see it in the vicinity of their own home. This was also true of housing for our unhoused residents. Would you like to see transitional housing? And would you support it if it were within a half mile of your home? And that produced a 17% drop in support. Single family housing had more support. Apartments and condominiums had minority support, and it dropped if it was in your neighborhood. And then finally, we learned that residents don't like high-rise housing. They don't want to see it, even if it's adjacent to transit options. There's very little support for that. About a third would support it. The rest, 2/3, not in favor. So that's what we're looking at. Basically, we learned that people want more housing, but people are also opposed to more housing. That's what we learned. Let me put it another way. People want more housing, but they would like to be somewhere else. People are in favor of housing, but they are not in favor of sprawl, and they are not in favor of density, and they're certainly not in favor of anything vertical. So that, friends, is the conundrum that we have faced for so long in the Bay Area, and it's not budging. This poll shows that is here to stay. Let me go quickly to the next subject. We asked folks how they were feeling about remote work, because that has become such a distinguishing feature of our region. Well, here's what we have. It turns out that people like it, huge majorities, about 3 out of 4 people want to be working remotely all of the time or some of the time. Now, let me break that down for you by the numbers. You might find this interesting. In Silicon Valley, about half of our population is able to work from home. The other half, it's not an option for them. They must do their job in person because that's the nature of their work or because it's required by their employer. Okay, so let's take that sample of the people that that do have the privilege of working remotely. Well, we learned that 39% of those are doing it all the time, every day, 5 days a week. 24% doing it some of the time. 6%, even though they can, don't take advantage of the opportunity. Then we also learned that of these people's employers, this is not a survey of employers, but a survey of workers, but this is what we learned about their employers as they reported them. 6% are going to end remote work. 41% are going to actually require some time at the workplace, but not 5 days. And then 53%, or about half, will continue dialing their own mix. They will work at home same way they did throughout the pandemic. Then we asked people, so what do you think? Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And people, for the most part, think that this is an advance. This is actually an upgrade. to our personal lives and an upgrade to the region because it decreases traffic and enables people to move to some other place where the housing is more affordable, and it's a lifestyle upgrade. It reduces our stress. It lets us balance our work and our personal lives. So that was interesting. We thought people might be concerned that remote work has reduced the vibrancy of our downtowns and our job districts, and that did not serve us as a concern. Less than 20% are concerned about that particular issue. Let me finally go to this. We were curious to know if people are returning to normal, or if they have a sense of normalcy, starting to replace the anxiety and the stress that we've been living under these past 2.5, 3 years. Well, this is what we found. For the most part, people are not going back to normal. Most people think that their lives are still different and may never fully recover. For example, we didn't see anybody saying, I'm actually traveling more than I was prior to the pandemic. We didn't see anybody to speak of saying, I'm actually working outside of my home more than I did, going to my place of worship. We just didn't get big numbers supporting any of those things. Then we asked if people are going out to shop more than they did, or going to parties, social events, going to large scale events. And very small slivers of our population is actually doing those things. And in fact, majorities, as you can see, more than 50% of our respondents are saying, no, I'm not doing any of those things. I'm not shopping. I'm not going to social events. I'm not going to the movie theaters. That's where we seem to be standing at this point. This is a heat map, by the way, that shows you who is the most cautious among us. So if it's a deeper shade of blue-gray, then that tells you, for example, that our senior population is more cautious than the younger demographics. It also shows you a difference, interestingly, with Democrats and Republicans again. Republicans are more inclined to return to normal. Democrats are exercising more caution. Okay, that's the end of the briefing. And I want to remind you again that we did this poll in partnership with Bay Area News Group, and we worked with a fabulous firm, a Silicon Valley polling firm that is disrupting the polling industry as we know it. And I would now like you to meet the lead pollster. She oversaw this entire operation, placing it in the field and harvesting the results, and then ensuring that they would be truly scientific. Her name is Kyla Ron-Ellenfitch. And she is now joining me on the screen. Kyla, thank you. I'm hoping that you will unmute yourself, and then would you just take a moment and talk to our audience about the survey itself? Did you find anything challenging, striking, different about this survey in comparison to other surveys that you would routinely put in the field? And then would you also just go over a few factoids about the methods that we employ? I actually have a slide. Would you like me to show your slide about methodology? Shall I do that, Kyla?
Sure.
Would that be helpful to you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, then I'll share again for a moment, and we can pull this up. Go ahead, Kyla.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, it's so great to be with you all, and great job describing the poll. I think there was a lot here that was very fascinating, and a kind of a continuation of what we've learned from last year, and seeing that, in fact, things aren't tending to go back to normal. There is kind of a new normal that we're living in right now. I just wanted to touch on a little bit of the methodology itself. So this is, really fresh data. We completed this online from September 9th to the 20th. This is a similar kind of time period to the poll that Russ had referred to from last year. So we also conducted that in the fall. So they're a really good kind of apples to apples comparison of what is happening in the region. We completed the survey entirely online from two different sources. So one is really relying on our proprietary recruitment method. So that we call our kind of our bias correction engine. Basically, that means that we are, excuse me, fielding our survey through digital advertising on Facebook and Instagram, and kind of adjusting our budgets as we go, making sure that we are achieving a really representative sample and reaching a very broad audience. And then we also supplement that with text messages sent to voters on the voter file. We really put a lot of effort into making sure that participation in the survey was really broad and representative of the very diverse region that we live in. So we fielded this among a really robust sample of 1,736 residents. This included an oversample of African Americans to make sure that we could really be doing comparisons within different racial and ethnic groups. And then we also fielded the survey in 4 languages. So of course in English, but also in Vietnamese, Mandarin, and in Spanish. We completed, we applied some weights as we, always do in the polling industry to make sure that we really have a representative sample. So we applied weights based on age, gender, region, education, as well as 2020 vote, which really helps us make sure that we're getting both kind of a demographically representative sample as well as ideological. And then the margin of error for this is plus or minus 2.7%. And I guess also one point, just as we were going through the comparisons from last year, this study was exclusively of residents, or it was completed among residents. Of course, that includes registered voters. Last year's study was of registered voters. So any of those comparisons are really of voters only, but I think show a pretty compelling case of how things are evolving.
That's right. We everything we showed you today was of all respondents, registered voters or not. However, anytime that we made a comparison to last year, that was a comparison of registered voters to registered voters. Going forward, our poll sample will always be all the residents, but we'll always be able to stratify by voter registration. Well, thank you, Kyla. So say something more about the 2.7 margin of error. I think our audience just wants to know, do you consider that an industry standard? Are we hitting above the bar?
Yeah, I would say in many aspects, we really, I think, went above and beyond sort of the industry standard. So both in kind of the scale of the survey, so achieving that sample of over 1,700 people, that's definitely a very robust sample. And then with quite a low margin of error, and then of course fielding in different languages, making sure that we are having good coverage of different groups. All of this gives us a lot of confidence in the results, and also in kind of these demographic breaks that we have a large enough sample that we can truly understand the perspective, say, of homeowners versus people that are renting, which has been, one really important and interesting cleavage that really stuck out, especially in talking about housing, but also in likelihood to stay in the region. All of this kind of longer term economic security really playing a role.
Terrific. Thank you, Kyla. Any other comments from a methodological standpoint?
I think that pretty much covers it. It was is a really interesting project, something that's, yeah.
And I meant to mention that we're very proud that Kyla is also an affiliated researcher with our institute, the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies. Okay, Kyla, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a brief pause. And I want you to get acquainted with one of our region's fabulous arts groups, and they are Mexican folk dancers. And I have asked Melinda if she would come on screen and tell us about Los Lupinos de San Jose.
Buenos dias, everyone. Thank you, Russ. As a former student, I am so pleased to welcome this next group of performers. Founded in 1969, Los Lupenos de San Jose is recognized as one of the earliest Mexican folk dance companies in California. They are known for their artistry, history, traditions, innovation, and originality. They are led by artistic director and choreographer Samuel Cortés. Please join me in welcoming Los Lupenos de San Jose.
Hello everyone, my name is Samuel Cortez and I am the Artistic Director for Lupenos De San Jose. Thank you to the team from Joint Venture Silicon Valley for putting this wonderful event together. It's refreshing to find an organization that cares about our community and works to make Silicon Valley a better place to live. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoy this wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Chata, güerita, te llamaras Isabel. Te dieras una vidita, güerita, y me vinieras a ver. ¿Cómo te llamas, chata, güerita? Te llamaras Isabel. Te dieras una vidita, güerita, y me vinieras a ver. Cuando te quiero te vas, cuando te aborrezco vienes. Dime por qué no te estás, donde más amores tienes. Te vas, te vas, te vas, te vas, te vas. Me voy, me voy, me voy, me voy, me voy. Al otro lado del mar, chaparrita, nos volveremos a ver. ¿Cómo te llamas, chata, güerita? Te llamarás Isabel. De los chinos que te cuelgan, güerita, te voy a hacer un cordón, que yo te daré por ellos, güerita, la vida y el corazón. De los chinos que te cuelgan, güerita, te voy a hacer un cordón, que yo te daré por ellos, güerita, la vida y el corazón. Cuando te quiero te vas, cuando te aborrezco vienes. Dime por qué no te estás, donde más amores tienes. Te vas, te vas, te vas, te vas, te vas. Me voy, me voy, me voy, me voy, me voy. Al otro lado del mar, chaparrita, nos volveremos a ver. ¿Cómo te llamas, chata, güerita? Te llamarás Isabel.
And they are Los Lupenos de San Jose. Listen, I thought that was perfectly wonderful. And you can be as gloomy as you feel like it, but nobody can deny that we have a thriving art scene in Silicon Valley. And all of us at Joint Venture are really proud of that. Well, now, in our remaining time, we're going to talk about this, and I'm anxious now to welcome to the screen two of the Mercury's most distinguished journalists. Marisa Kendall is the first, and you read her work on Sunday, front page Mercury News, as they gave treatment to this poll. And she is joined today by Ethan Varian. You read his work yesterday, again, front page, unpacking the data and information that we surfaced, particularly around housing. So thank you, both of you, for joining us. We sure appreciate your time today. I'm just going to toss both of you a question. Let me frame it this way. I was frankly surprised. I thought people would be in a better mood. If you think about it, the pandemic is now on its heels. The economy is coming around, and there are actually a number of things. Traffic congestion is getting better as a result of working from home. People working from home have had this big upgrade to their lifestyle. I actually thought we'd be a little more bouncy in the poll this year, and yet we had the gloomiest result that we've ever seen. Marisa, I start with you. Were you surprised by that? What was your biggest takeaway from the poll?
Yeah, I think the results just really show that even though on a statewide or a national level, though, maybe we're doing okay economically, people haven't seen that trickle down to affect their lives yeah, they're still really concerned with what's going on immediately in front of them, whether it's this homelessness crisis that they're not seeing get any better despite, politicians talking about it and putting efforts into place. They're seeing home prices continue to rise. They're not seeing their income go up, and they're still just struggling with a lot of these really severe issues we have around housing affordability, income disparities, and all of that. So yeah, while it's always disheartening to see that. I think it makes sense. It's not always a surprise anymore.
Despite some of these negative responses, people still express a sense of belonging to the Bay Area, even more than their own town or their own neighborhood. Were you surprised by that? And how do you interpret that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those paradoxes, and I think that's why people continue to live here. It is hard. There's a lot that's wrong with the Bay Area. It's really hard to survive here, economically in particular. But there is something about the Bay Area that keeps people here, that people fall in love with. Whether it's the culture, the weather, the things to do, the outdoor beauty. There's that something special about the Bay Area, and I think that is what you get at with that sense of belonging question.
Ethan, so let's talk about housing. Everybody agrees that housing costs are a big problem, and yet no agreement on whether the region could or even should build its way out of this problem. So first, your thoughts about that, and then I want to talk about what's happening, what folks are actually doing about it.
Sure thing. Well, I think it's important to note that while a third of residents don't want to see significantly more housing, we still have a majority who do say they want to see that. But a third is a lot, and who makes up that third is really important in how housing policies play out, which is sort of what my story took a look at. This metric was already mentioned, but I really took a look at the split between homeowners and renters. We have 66% of renters supporting building significantly more housing, while just 42% of homeowners, and we have a pretty even split there.
Yep.
And we could go more into that.
Well, let's just start right there. Well, I guess all we need to do is tag that reality that once you're a homeowner, there is this ironic sense that now you have yours, but you don't want anybody else to have theirs. Do we need to be calling that out? Do we need to be more strident and aggressive on that front?
The state certainly thinks so.
So
we have this upcoming housing planning process that the Bay Area is going through right now, where the state is forcing cities and counties to plan for over 440,000 new homes in the Bay Area over the next 8 years. And the state is signaling, the governor is signaling, they're not signaling, they're being very forward about it. If cities and counties don't go through this process appropriately and don't do it in good faith, they will be sued. They will lose land use authority. They will face huge fines. We've seen the governor, his state housing department launch an investigation into the city of San Francisco for not approving enough homes quickly enough. And where a lot of that opposition comes from historically in the Bay Area and other places in the country is from homeowners. And homeowners tend to have the most political power, have the most wealth, are able to attend a city council meeting on a Tuesday night to have their voices heard, and local officials hear that and feel that, and sometimes have even flouted these state housing laws to accommodate the views of local homeowners.
Ethan, I want to point out that we have maybe one of the most aggressive governors in recent history. A lot of rhetoric on the subject, a lot of action to match that rhetoric. He seems to be serious. Let me just say that. He has a legislature that's mostly one party and seems to be lined up to support him. And we're starting to see things like fines, lawsuits being thrown around. Then you add to the mix that one of the most strident legislators is our own Senator Wiener, state senator from San Francisco. So I'm wondering if you sense a tip in the balance of power. And if you actually do see a scenario where Silicon Valley cities and towns lose their actual land use authority?
They certainly, advocates, experts, and lawmakers make it sound like that's a real possibility. Now, I asked the governor about this. He had a press conference. I asked him, how do you think cities and counties are doing on their various cities and counties are doing on their planning? And he said, for the most part, I think they're doing well, but some aren't. So I think he signaled he wants to work with them to make sure they get it to plan accordingly. Now, if you don't plan accordingly, if your plan is not approved by the state, that's when you lose land use authority. And there's a couple different ways that can happen. There's a court process where a judge will essentially take it over. Or there's something called the builder's remedy, where basically if a developer wants to build somewhere and it meets very limited zoning and building regulations, it happens, and cities and counties have no control over it. Whether that would actually happen, it's tough to say. I think the builder's remedy's only been used once, or it's being threatened to be used once. It's in Redondo Beach or somewhere down in Southern California. There's a big fight going on with that right now. So it's sort of one of those remains to be seen situations, but lawmakers and experts, seem to believe this is a very real possibility.
Yep. Marisa, you actually talked to folks. You were able to have conversations with people who took the survey and identified themselves as willing to talk to the media. Anything interesting that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. So folks mentioned, when I asked folks why they were dissatisfied with the direction the Bay Area is going in, folks gave a wide range of answers, everything from one man who worried that his daughter, who's now 9, maybe wouldn't be able to ever afford to live here when she grows up, to folks who were really concerned about climate change and just were not satisfied with how our local and state government was handling that, to folks who are really fed up with the homelessness crisis and just not seeing our local leaders do anything that was that they felt was really helping that. But a lot of folks did have a bright spot, which was remote work. The poll showed about half of folks are still able to work from home, even though we're 2.5 years past the start of the pandemic. And the majority of those people are taking advantage of that option and want that option. So people I talked to said remote work is giving them the opportunity to do all sorts of things they never would have been able to do otherwise. Everything from coaching their little girls' basketball team, to starting a new degree program, to taking care of their aging pet rats. So that was really a bright spot in people's lives. And I think that's something that is not going to go away anytime soon.
The percentage of people wanting to move grew by 9% after the pandemic set in. I was surprised by that. How about you? Was that intuitive to you?
I'm always surprised when it continues to go up. Mm-hmm. And I think that just goes back to this lingering sense of discontentment people have. Though I think remote work also plays into that, because now if remote work is here to stay, you can work from anywhere. So those folks who maybe last year, a couple of years ago said, I kind of want to move, but my job's here. I like my job. I have to stay. Now remote work is a thing. Maybe their office has closed because some companies, they kept a hold of their office during the pandemic. And then they just said, it's not worth it anymore. They shut down the office. Now they're remote forever. So now you have more people who maybe have that opportunity to move to Detroit and buy a house for, pennies.
Exactly. I think that's a really plausible interpretation. I'm going to ask a provocative question. There are some people who say the market will fix this. In fact, the market is already fixing this. And if a bunch of people leave the region, that's actually not necessarily a bad thing. It might even be a good thing. It might alleviate all of this pressure on housing prices and other forms of infrastructure. Would either of you care to comment?
My grandmother told me the same thing recently. And I think that could be true, but I think that's just would be so sad. If the market fixes itself by everyone fleeing and home prices plummeting, where does that leave the area? That just seems like a really sad outcome. I just think you would lose a lot of the vibrancy and the beauty of the area and the culture. So I really hope that we can intervene and fix that before that happens.
Yeah, and frankly, even though with people leaving, we're just not seeing housing costs come down in any measurable way. I mean, home prices are actually, I mean, they're coming down a little bit now due to, or a considerable amount due to interest rates, but they're still way up year over year and still way higher than they were before the pandemic. And you see some of that with rental costs coming down in places like San Francisco and downtown Oakland. But I think just with the housing crunch that we're in, it's hard to know how many people would actually have to leave before that supply and demand equation changed enough to bring down housing costs in a really way.
Yeah, I am now turning to our chat windows and the question and answer panel, and I'm going to work in some questions that are coming from our audience. And thank you, audience, for these. Rod Sinks says, what will it take for people to connect the dots between housing supply and the departing teachers, departing healthcare workers, and the struggling restaurants? Either of you?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of people who will argue people are connecting those dots. They increasingly are. I talked to Scott Wiener, the senator from San Francisco, state senator, for this story, and he made that point forcefully that everybody knows someone who's struggling. We are seeing more people come to this realization. Our poll still obviously shows a lot of division there. Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, I think, again, it comes down to people will support housing generally, or more likely to support housing generally in the Bay Area. But if you ask, you know, do you want it in your neighborhood? It's a much tougher question. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think we can all imagine what they might be. But I think there is evidence that people are starting to see this, starting to feel this. And, you know, state lawmakers are starting to feel that as well. And they're increasingly taking up more policies to address this issue.
Eric Filseth from Palo Alto says, I wonder what it will take for us to try any other strategies than just upzone everywhere. And assuming that the private sector will build so much new housing that market prices will just fall across the Bay Area. That way we won't have to spend actual money on things like housing and transportation infrastructure. What about that? Either one of you?
I'm sorry, I think I missed that. Was the argument that is a good thing? We should just let the market take over, and if we upzone enough, yeah, that is one of. So I think the argument from most experts and from the state now is we need to build significantly more types of housing of all types, including market rate and affordable. There's some division there, but again, it really comes back to, can you convince local governments to do this? The state is saying they're going to convince them to do this, and there's the economic realities of development in the Bay Area, which goes beyond anything local governments or the state can really control. Labor costs, material costs, supply chain issues, all of these things that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. In short, there are a lot of people who are making that argument that yes, you know, if we build enough, if we follow through on these state housing goals, supply and demand equation will change enough that we will see housing costs come down.
We're now in the lightning round. We have to go quick because we only have a few minutes. Here's Rob George. Rob George says, despite the pandemic waning and society entering into the endemic phase, small businesses continue to struggle. More and more businesses that have been hard hit in the last 2.5 years are seeing increased costs, fees, et cetera. And these are returning at the worst possible time. No one is applying to these positions, and many businesses are forced to limit hours of operation. Many are closing permanently. Okay, here's the question. How do these results forecast the trajectory of small extreme businesses pulling back? Silicon Valley can't sustain itself with big tech alone. Any comment there?
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's something that people I talked to really noticed. That was one of the things that was affecting their quality of life and making them less happy with life in the Bay Area. Was a lot of their favorite small businesses have closed and aren't coming back. So I think that's a huge problem that we need to address.
next in our lightning round. Charles Nolan says, isn't the root cause of the anti-high-rise movement a minority within a unified environmental coalition that labels high-rises visual pollution? Ethan, maybe you're the one to field that. By the way, there was another question saying, well, what is a high-rise? And I think people are thinking anything above 5 stories is what we're calling a high-rise here.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, I know historically that has been sort of the argument in the Bay Area. I don't know if it's as much now. The Manhattanization of San Francisco or whatnot back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that conversation was happening. As far as environmental groups go, the Sierra Club and the Greenbelt Alliance, I believe, they go on record saying we support more dense housing where we already have infrastructure. Dense housing is actually more efficient for using resources, including water. So they tend to support more high-rise housing. Actually, what they push back on more is sprawl. So I don't know if that answers that question directly, but it has been interesting to note how at least local environmental groups, how their position on housing has shifted over the years.
Thanks, appreciate that. We are out of time. The last question is actually a statement, but I think it's a useful one. This is Peter Katz. Zoning for housing is one part of the equation. Supporting overstressed services like schools, hospitals is another important part of the equation. Are we prepared to address increased construction needs for those kinds of things? I'll let either one of you comment if you want to have the last word on that.
I think that is something that people mention a lot when they're opposing new development. But I will just say our schools are actually losing kids. Schools around here, they're not overburdened. Schools are shutting down in Oakland because there's not enough kids and not enough budget because of not enough property taxes. And again, there's fewer people in San Francisco, for example, are having school-age kids because families can't afford to live there. So it's sort of an interesting dichotomy there.
Thank you for that. Marisa, Ethan, thank you to both of you. Thank you for your reporting. Thank you for answering the call of journalism. And thank you for being citizens of our region. I want to thank our partners at Mercury News as well for being our collaborators on this project now year after year. We're grateful. Well, we promised you a 10 o'clock finish. We are going to complete our time together by having a moment, and the moment is going to be poetic, and it is going to come from the rising generation. Her name is Michelle Chow. She is 16 years old, and she has been participating in the Poet Laureate program for youth that is sponsored by Santa Clara County. We have asked her if she would provide a benediction to this proceeding. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Michelle Chow.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Chow, and I'm a student at Leland High School. Many thanks to Russell Hancock and Joint Venture Silicon Valley for hosting this wonderful event and inviting me to share my poetry. Golden Gate. The Pacific Ocean and her strange beauty, found in the calm blues of vast stretches, tethered to sand and moss, desert thorn crowns and cypress fog. This behemoth of seas rules with her quiet endurance, her vast authority in horizons and the dusk. The power of piercing waves and thundering currents is built by droplets, the size of ladybugs, of pupils, of hummingbird breath. For we are parts of a whole, and only when united in community, in solidarity, in hope, can we trust the power of the Pacific. As California gulls raise their voices in joyful wailing calls, their beaks meet sea salt spray and their wings catch the wind. Tossed in solar rays, we have drifted here to meet at golden gates. steel ropes hammered and strung in a delicate, impossible balance. But what truly is balance, and who decides? In our orbit around our star, we gaze toward the cosmos in a dance with gravity and space. I hope to see stars, each brighter than the other, together weaving a tapestry of beauty. But when stars go out like candles in hail, our hearts and lives can build upon community. For community is stronger, more grounded, more valuable than the brightest of lights. For community is the thing bigger than us all. It holds heritage, history, legacy, culture, the DNA that swirls heavy in our bones. And in community, we work to find empathy, understanding, action, rebuilding the golden gates in a more just balance.
She's Michelle Chow, and she has brought a benediction to our proceeding. We are now concluded. Thank you for joining us. We will gather again on February 17th to release the annual Silicon Valley Index. We'll place the poll alongside the index to talk about the actual facts and how they compare to the way people are feeling. And then we will do this all again 1 year from now. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to everybody who helped make this production possible, including our friends at Kaiser Permanente. We bid you a good day.